Hello everyone, I'm Jon Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. My guest for this week's interview is Jessica Holmes. She took the oath of office to become North Carolina's state auditor back in December, and when she did, she became the first African-American woman to ever serve in that role. Jessica Holmes grew up in the small Pender County community of Maple Hill, graduated from Pender High School in 2002. She became the first person in her family to go to college, attending and graduating from UNC Chapel Hill, and then going on to graduate from UNC Law School. But none of that may have ever happened had it not been for some special women who cared enough for Jessica Holmes to help change her life. Madam Auditor, welcome to the One-on-One with Jon Evans podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Take me back, if you can, to when you got the phone call that Governor Roy Cooper wanted to name Jessica Holmes as the auditor of the state of North Carolina.
Well, when I got the phone call to come over to visit with the governor at the governor's mansion, I could not believe that of all of the people that were interested in this position, that I was the one receiving the phone call. And I recall the governor sitting across from me and saying, he's a person of faith, I'm a person of faith. And he said, Jessica, I prayed on this all night, and you're the one. And I was incredibly nervous, and I was leery of running statewide for political office again. Mm-hmm. I love the work. I don't always like the politics of politics. Mm-hmm. And so being appointed and starting a campaign at the same time felt like a very difficult challenge. But it's a challenge that he believed I was ready to meet. And because of his confidence, here I am, and putting my best foot forward every single day.
When you stood up there, though, that day when he introduced you in front of the media, you're no stranger to the media because you had been a county commissioner in Wake County. But was that a different kind of appearance before reporters and before microphones than you had ever experienced before?
Absolutely. It was my first time participating in a press conference that was at the governor's mansion with the governor standing next to me, who's also a proud double Tar Heel. So, this whole experience has been a bit of a whirlwind, but I am no stranger to politics, as you mentioned. In 2014, I was elected as the youngest person ever elected to Wake County's Board of Commissioners, mm-hmm. and also later, the youngest person to ever serve as chair of that board, helping to manage about a $1.1 billion budget, about 4,000 staff members. And so I'm no stranger to politics and budgets and running agencies at the local and state level.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about your time as a county commissioner later. Auditor to me is like you're the state government's investigative reporter.
Correct.
But not a lot of people, I think, know the ins and outs of what the state auditor, number one, does, but what the auditor's office does. So who do you audit? When do you audit? How does it all come about?
What we don't do is individual taxes. And so oftentimes when I'm out and about, people will say, oh, I hope you don't look at my taxes. So we do not audit individual taxes. We are able to audit all state agencies, as well as all of the UNC system colleges and universities. So each year, we audit about $100 billion in state assets and liabilities. So that's on our financial side. Mm-hmm. We also audit roughly 48 of the roughly 53 or so community colleges across our state. So that's our financial side. The side that often ends up in the media would be our investigative or our performance division.
Mm-hmm. When do you audit someone under that umbrella? Does somebody come to you and say, hey, I think there's a problem here, or I think you need to look into X, Y, or Z?
Absolutely. And so we have a tip line that is anonymous. Mm-hmm. So folks can either call in or they can do an online submission. But Quite frankly, I am personally a walking billboard for the tip line. I've been at events and had people write things on a napkin and hand it to me, and we'll look at that complaint just as we would any other. So many complaints come to me directly or come to our staff members directly.
What have you learned about working in state government? I mean, you were an attorney, a labor and employment attorney, again, which we'll talk about in a little while, but you were getting involved in state government. And what have you learned that maybe the public doesn't know about? The operations, the people of state government, how it works. Give us an inside look at somebody who's fairly new to state government herself.
So prior to this position, I was a deputy commissioner in the North Carolina Industrial Commission. So I have been a state employee and, sat on the other side of the table.
Right.
And so one of the challenges I don't think many people realize about state government in general is the high vacancy rate in terms of competing with the private market. So we're expected to do what we're statutorily required to do. And oftentimes we're doing so on either a limited budget and or with significant vacancies in our offices.
And is that difficult? Is that difficult to try to do the public's work, maybe when you don't think you have enough people to do it right?
Absolutely. In terms of my office in particular, it means that we're not able to get audits completed as quickly as we would like. And also, in terms of just staff morale, some people are operating and wearing more than one hat. And so that's a challenge. But what I can say about the staff at the Office of the State Auditor, I have an amazing team. I have people that are going to stay late and do the work, and people that are just going to make sure it's done and that it's done well. All of our audits, all of our reports are top tier. But that does come at a cost in terms of employee morale. So we would like to get those vacancies filled as soon as possible. There is seemingly a shortage of folks graduating with accounting degrees, with CPAs, MBAs. And so we're competing with the private market. And as a state agency, we're paying state agency rates.
Right.
And so that's a challenge when folks are graduating from college or with their graduate degrees. It's difficult for us sometimes to compete with what the private market is able to offer. But we are able to offer more of a work-life balance.
Gotcha.
We are a family-friendly office. I encourage my staff to use their community service leave to go on their kids' field trips, to volunteer in the community. And so, we make it work.
Well, I was going to ask you that because I spoke to DHHS Secretary Cody Kinsley not long ago, obviously another southeastern North Carolina native. And I found out in doing some research about him, his dog comes into work with him, sits underneath the desk. For a while, he had no meetings before 9 in the morning kind of a policy. If I were to talk to members of the state auditor's office, what kind of boss is Jessica Holmes? What kind of person are you around the office? What do you tell your people? Are you demanding? Do you raise the level of acceptance? Talk to me about Jessica as the boss.
What I will tell you is that I prefer meetings not to be set until at least 10 a.m.
Okay.
So, I just need to get in the office, have time to sort of plan out my day and have my Starbucks and, get my tea or coffee fix before I jump in. I'm that person that will stay late. I'm more of a night person, so I have no problem working until 7, 8, 9 p.m. Obviously, I do not expect my staff to do that, but I have an open door policy, and I feel very strongly that my job is to make sure that my staff can do their job, and whether that's making sure they're comfortable in terms of ergonomic workspaces, whether that's making sure there's peppermint in the break room. I literally had a staff member say, it would be nice if we had hard candy in the break room. And I pulled up my phone, went to my Amazon account, and I ordered hard candy and went and put it in both of our break rooms. So when it comes to the things that are within my power to do, as a state agency, I'm not always able to give significant raises. But the things that I can do to make staff comfortable, like having an open door policy, making sure that I meet with all of my regional offices, like here in Wilmington, and giving people that one-on-one time and listening. So I find that the greatest skill that I have as a leader is the ability to listen, because they know their jobs better than I do. And so my job is to support them in getting that work done.
You're a member of the Council of State.
Yes.
First female African American to wear that mantle.
It only took about 235 years for me to get here.
It's been a while.
It's been a while.
Who do you answer to? Who do you want to make sure you do your job right?
The people. Serving on the Council of State, while I was appointed by Governor Cooper, my job and the people that I'm accountable to, the people of North Carolina. This is my state. I was born and raised here. My mom was born and raised here. My grandma was, my great-grandma. And so I'm just here to do the work of the people. I tell anybody that the auditor's work is to follow the money. Money is not red or blue, it's green. And that's my focus as state auditor.
Talk to me about Maple Hill, North Carolina. If you were to look up small town, rural North Carolina, even though it starts with an M, I think Maple Hill might be pretty high on that list. Now, you just said you were born there, your mom, your grandma, obviously family roots in that community. What was it like for Jessica and the family growing up in Maple Hill, North Carolina?
Let me start by saying there is nothing, in my opinion, better than a small town environment. We've always been a very close-knit community, and you could literally go to anybody's house and get something to eat. And we're a small community, but we are a community that loves each other, that considers everybody family. So, you know, your best friend's aunt is your auntie, you know, your best friend's grandma is your grandma. And so, you know, that's the benefit of being from a small town, is that we take some level of responsibility for lifting up the community, because we all know each other, we all love each other, and we consider everyone family. I grew up riding horses. That was, and still is, one of my favorite hobbies. I grew up with my grandmother and my great-grandmother having gardens. So we would go out into the garden and pick strawberries or tomatoes, cucumbers.
Whatever you wanted to eat.
Whatever you wanted to eat.
All you had to go was in the backyard,
All you had to do was go to the garden and go to the spigot on the side of the house and rinse it off and sit on the porch, and that was some good eating.
Sounds like small town America.
Yeah.
But as I prepared for today's interview, listened and read some interviews with you, you said you experienced homelessness.
I did.
As a child. Tell me about that and what that did to then encourage you to, as a professional, try to make an impact on homelessness in this state.
Yeah, so there was a time, I believe in the sort of late 80s, where there was essentially a drug pandemic that ran through our community, and many people and many families were impacted, including my own. And so I'm the eldest of 5 kids. So my mom, who off and on worked at a meatpacking plant,
right,
with 5 young kids,
right,
we would have trouble finding housing. And so we've lived in about 7 different homeless shelters across the state of North Carolina in elementary school.
Wow. How did you, or did you not know what you may not have had at the time?
I definitely think at the time I didn't necessarily understand how different this was from other people's experiences. And even when I got to college, quite frankly, I learned more about other people's experiences. And I was like, what? You didn't use your stove to heat your house?
Yeah.
Or you didn't have a kerosene heater? Or those are supposedly bad? You know, you actually had air and heat running. Like that was a thing. And so it's literally taken years for me to understand the difference between, my upbringing and how different that was from, many of the people that I, for example, went to UNC Chapel Hill with.
Are you better because of it?
I would say so. In terms of leadership and service, because I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of many of those services, whether it be, I remember food stamps when it was paper. And I remember receiving food items from churches and community organizations. I know what it's like to look for housing. And at the time, my mom had dropped out of high school in order to have me. And so the challenges of finding a job that paid a livable wage to where she could care for herself and her 5 kids. So a lot of the challenges that are facing many North Carolinians, I have faced them as well. And or my family has faced them as well. One thing that I'm very honest and transparent about is that I have more criminal convictions in my family than I do college degrees. And the reality is I am just degrees of separation away from bad decisions that I saw other people make. And so I'm a believer in second chances. I'm a believer in paying people a livable wage. I'm a believer in addressing food insecurity. In Wake County, for example, about a third of the students are on free and reduced price lunch. I grew up on free and reduced price lunch. So, for example, when the COVID pandemic shut schools down, one of my first concerns was, how do we get food to these kids?
Right.
And they may be getting their only meal of the day at school.
Right.
And so I volunteered with the school system to deliver meals to hotel families during the time that schools were shut down during the pandemic. So it's one thing to talk about issues impacting people from an academic perspective, but when you have lived experiences, right. I think it just adds a layer of authenticity to me, in that I'm open about telling my story. And it also lets people know that, I am not some person that came in from on high. I've had some of those same experiences, and, I have dedicated my life to public service and trying to address some of those issues so that hopefully our kids don't have to have some of the same experiences that I did.
How good a person was your mom? You talk about her in interviews that I have listened to. I can hear in your voice when you talk about your mom, how not only important she was, obviously single mom working in a meatpacking plant, getting injured on the job in a meatpacking plant,
correct,
raising 5 kids, but also just, to me, when you talk about her in worship is not the word, but she's almost like your hero, is what I get from just listening and seeing your face when you talk about her.
Yeah, my mom is my very best friend. I also give a lot of credit to where I am to my grandmother, whose saying would be something like, while she only had about a 4th or 5th grade education, she would always say, "You're going to get your education." And so I take a lot of my strength from my grandmother, who retired from a dry cleaner in Jacksonville, and from my mom, who just never gave up. No matter how difficult the situation was, I still remember times when we would, pull up at a shelter, and we would just hope they would let us in so that we didn't have to sleep in the car for the night. And so, again, back then I didn't appreciate or understand what was really going on. And so I can't imagine the pressure and the angst that she felt in trying to make sure that her kids had a place to stay, had food. And, these are so many things that, so many people take for granted. But, I know those stories and I see them. So when people start talking about poverty in North Carolina from a textbook perspective,
right.
Sometimes it's helpful to let them know that, this thing that you think is going to be helpful may not be as helpful as you think. Requiring people to go online to sign up for services. They may or may not have access to a computer, particularly during COVID. when a lot of the services were online, but a lot of the libraries were also closed. And so I'm able to think outside of the box and sometimes find creative solutions to problems that may just go over, someone else's head, because
Sure.
I'm very practical, pragmatic person, and you'd be surprised how well that has worked in terms of just having good old common sense solutions to problems.
When did college come onto your radar as you were growing up and graduating from Pender County High or from Pender High School in 2002? When did it become apparent to you that A, I can go to college, and B, I'm going to make this work?
I will shout out two teachers in particular. Rochelle Whiteside, who was my high school theater teacher, and Karen Quinn, who was my high school tennis coach. And I'll never forget the day that Rochelle Whiteside, my drama teacher, literally lifted my chin, because I used to speak like this, with my head down, and I would mumble. And I was not very good at eye contact. And a part of that was just I didn't feel like I had very much to say that was worthy. So I just wanted to sort of come into a classroom and do my work and, and keep it moving. But I'll never forget the day that she lifted my chin and said, "Jessica, lift your head. You have something to say, and it's worth hearing." And
Wow.
And believe it or not, that 15-second exchange literally changed my life, because no one had said that to me so directly. And I don't know what possessed her to do that, but she did it. And I keep going back to that all of these years later. "Jessica, you have something to say." And it reminds me when I'm at tables that where I'm the youngest person ever, or the only woman, or the only person of color, it reminds me that I have something to say. I have a perspective that is important, and that I belong at the table.
When both of my daughters, Monica and Abby, both attended UNC, I remember when the letters came to the house and they found out that they got in because they wanted to go there. I remember the importance of that and the joy and satisfaction that the whole family had. You being the first one to attend college in your family, what was that acceptance into UNC? How much did it mean not only to you, but to your family who had, we've heard, struggled many times in the way while you grew up?
Tears. I mean, quite frankly, I did not want to show anyone any of my college acceptance letters and open them in front of folks, because I was afraid that maybe I wouldn't get in. Even though, I was in high school a McDonald's scholar, had excellent grades. Growing up near Camp Lejeune, a part of me always thought I would go into the military.
Really?
And so, in my community, it seemed you went to work at a meatpacking plant, which was Thornapple Valley, when it was open, or the military. Those seemed to be the most prominent sort of options where I grew up. And so it wasn't until high school that college seriously crossed my mind, and that's because of educators at Pender High School who saw that potential in me. And so I'll never forget, almost hiding the acceptance letter so that I could open it by myself, because I didn't want to disappoint my family. And so, getting into UNC Chapel Hill is a dream come true. And then to be able to go to law school there is a dream come true. I was literally just on campus last Friday, parked illegally. But since the students were on spring break, I just, jumped into a quick parking space so that I could go into the student center and buy some new gear. But, I love UNC. I love the UNC system and how that ties into my work as auditor. We audit all of the UNC system colleges and universities, and we make sure the money there, again, is going where it's supposed to go, from financial aid to other student resources. And, I just think I'm grateful for the UNC system and the fact that it provides an opportunity for so many first-generation students all across our state. We have some wonderful institutions.
Why labor and employment as your specialty as an attorney?
I started out in labor and employment largely because of my personal experiences and the reality that, many people in my community, when Thornapple Valley closed, the community was just devastated. My belief that, watching my grandmother work on her feet, hours and hours and hours on end at a dry cleaner in Jacksonville, and sometimes I would go and I'd watch her, and me believing, there's this misconception that, people who can't make it, who can't make ends meet, are lazy, or they just don't want to do work. But that's not always the case. There are people who put in the work 40, 50, sometimes even 60 hours a week, and are not able to make ends meet. And so labor and employment law became important to me because, one, ensuring that people are safe in the workplace. My mom suffered an injury to her hand when she was working at a plant. I will never forget visiting her in the hospital and then leaving without her. And I was thinking, like, Mom, get up, like, let's go home.
Yeah.
And I couldn't at that time understand, like, why she was spending the night there and not coming home. And so, if anything, that situation, and so oftentimes when people get injured, they don't know what to do. They're afraid to report it because they're afraid that they won't be able to keep their jobs. And so, I think it's important to make sure that people who work earn a decent wage, and that people who are injured on the job are fairly compensated for it.
When did politics become part of what Jessica Holmes wanted to do? I read again, as I did research, you wanted to be an attorney. You didn't want to run for office when you went to law school. So it wasn't,
Absolutely.
You didn't have that on your radar, I don't think. How did it come on your radar, and why did you decide to run for county commissioner in Wake County in 2014 and win on top of it?
Yeah, I, like most women, have to be asked multiple times in order to run for office. So again, I'm someone who just likes to do the work. If I care about education, then I want to be an advocate for, school funding and paying teachers well and creating the best learning environment that we can. If I care about affordable housing, I want to be the best affordable housing advocate that I can. And because of those personal experiences, I was one of those people that was constantly at school board meetings, at the legislative building, at marches, and supporting educators and supporting the community. And I'll never forget, someone said something to the effect of, when decision makers aren't making the decisions that you want them to make, then maybe you should change the decision maker. And so I didn't fathom that as an option. Like, I've always worked as an advocate to influence policymakers and elected officials. It didn't occur to me inherently that that was something that I could or should do. And when I looked at the Wake County Board of Commissioners, at that time, there was no woman of color. And also the median age was probably 60, 65.
Right.
And at the time, I was in my late 20s. And I was like, there is no way this is going to work. And so, it's hard to be what you can't see. So when you don't see someone that looks like you in a space, it's hard to aspire to be in that space or to believe that you can and that you're capable. And so, yes, I figured when I ran in 2014, I said something to the effect of, I hope you all know that I do not come from a wealthy background. My parents will not be creating a PAC. I will not, I don't have a lot of wealthy friends. Most of my attorneys are public interest attorneys. We're not wealthy people. And so I don't know if I can raise the money. And folks were like, let us worry about that. And so I was not sure I would win. I was not at all convinced I would win. But for me, it was an opportunity to elevate the issues that I cared about, so that the people that were making the decisions, that, you know, I could make sure these issues were talked about, we could get their statements on the record, and we could hold them accountable in terms of delivering on those promises. And so, you know, obviously I'm a part of a political party, but I went into this saying, I don't want anyone's talking points. I don't want anyone's platform. These are the issues I'm going to talk about, and these are the issues that I'm going to run on. And that was mainly education, addressing affordable housing, which is
Still an issue, yes.
Across the state,
Right, yeah.
Food insecurity, and so on. And so I was like, I'm not using anybody's playbook, because if I'm going to do this and put my life sort of out into the public, then even if I can't win, what I can get out of it is knowing that I forced a conversation on issues that other people maybe wanted to sweep under the rug. And so...
And you won.
And I won.
Yeah.
Substantially. And I mean, I thought there's no way they're going to elect this country bumpkin from Maple Hill, Pender County as a Wake County commissioner. And not only did they do it once, they did it twice.
Right.
And also I became elected by my colleagues on the board, being the youngest, as the youngest person ever to wield the gavel in Wake County's history.
Now, that to me takes service to the next level. I mean, you could serve on a board, but when you chair it, when you lead it, that is taking service to me to the next level.
It is.
You were an outsider. You were not a politician. Did there come a time on that board where you felt like, I belong here?
It took a while.
How long did it take, and was there like a day the light switch went on and said, I should be here? Because obviously when you're running, I don't know if I'm going to get elected. How am I going to do this? Are they going to like my ideas? Should I speak up? All that stuff has to be running through your mind. But when did you come to the realization that, yeah, Jessica should be on this board?
While obviously the voters thought Jessica should be on this board, but when I got the position, I wasn't so sure that Jessica had what it takes to be on that board. And so that came with a lot of sort of imposter syndrome, that came with a lot of almost over preparation, because before I'd go into a meeting, like, I'd read all of the materials. And if I got a 600-page budget book, you know, I would make sure I read every word. Oof. And I could answer every question. And, you know, no one was ever going to sort of catch me, you know, off of my toes. And one of the early mistakes I made was making arguments based off of what my heart felt. Like, we should invest in this because it's the right thing to do. We should invest in that because it's the right thing to do. And so in politics, you have to oftentimes make the business case for expenditures. And so one example being regarding affordable housing. When you make the business case for people that we call familiar faces. These are people who cycle through hospitals, cycle through jails, cycle through prisons. We've identified individuals that can literally cost taxpayers upwards of $200,000 a year.
Right. In services.
Right. In interacting with the system. And so these are people who can tell you what day their favorite meal is served in the hospital, and that they go to the ER when it gets cold outside or when it's raining. And on average, it would cost us about $50,000 a year to house those individuals and provide wraparound services. So I had to learn that, you know, sort of righteousness, or what I believe to be the right thing, was not necessarily everyone's priority. And so learning how to work within a team and learning how to understand what other people care about, and that they hold those values as much as you hold yours. And so that took some growing pains. And I must say that I'm a better leader because of it. At the time, it felt like I was being baptized by fire.
Sure.
But it's taught me how to better communicate and how to work in collaboration with others to actually get the job done.
Did there come a time, and I've been doing this now, and for 40 years in television, and
yes, you're famous. You're a legend.
No, I just have a big mouth. That's all it is. But in the last, I would say 2 decades, maybe 15 years or so, it seems to me, as an outsider and somebody who covers politics, that compromise has become a dirty word. Did you find that as someone serving in politics, someone serving on a board with Republicans and Democrats? Did you find it that way, or is it not as much on the county level and maybe in state government and obviously in federal government?
Compromise is an interesting word at every single level of government, including local government. And so I must say that initially, I didn't want to compromise because I thought, well, if this is the right thing to do, then I shouldn't have to exchange my vote and support you for this in exchange for you supporting this because this is the right thing to do. And that was a lesson I had to learn. Sometimes when you come to the negotiating table or when you're just dealing with people, you have to understand their perspective. And I now know that compromise is not a nasty word, but it's a necessary word. And I think that at the local, state, and national level, we'd all be a lot better off if we embraced that word more.
Did you ever think, after graduating, becoming an attorney, starting to practice, before you got into Wake County government, did you ever think about coming back to Pender County to practice law? My son is an attorney. He works in the state attorney general's office. But he still talks every once in a while about maybe coming back to Wilmington to practice. What about you? You ever given any thought to coming back to Pender County?
I have certainly, over the years, given it a lot of thought because there is the reality that Eastern North Carolina in particular, we are breeding talent. And then that talent ends up, typically in our urban areas. They're in Raleigh, they're in Charlotte, and as a result, you can literally look at a map that shows that the population in rural areas is decreasing and the urban centers are growing drastically. Both Wake and Mecklenburg have over 1 million residents in just those 2 counties, and our overall population is roughly 10 million. And so it is certainly on my mind that, I am one of those people that was born, bred, and lifted up by Pender County. And so the way that I reconcile that right now is that I go home often. And oftentimes at the church that I grew up in, which was the church of my grandma and my great-grandma, oftentimes I'll do back-to-school drives and give those out at my community. I'm very active in my community. I go home and at every opportunity, I let people know I am not from Wake County. I am from Pender County, and more specifically, I am from Maple Hill. So I carry my community with me. My community loves me. My community is so proud of me.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I go home, like the love, the kisses, the just well wishes. Like I know that if no other town in North Carolina is praying for me, I know that Maple Hill is praying for me. And I know that anytime I go home, somebody will fix me my favorite meal.
Which is?
Chicken and dumplings. Chicken and pastry. I also like homemade biscuits.
Oh, my.
And I know it's a heavy meal, but like,
But there's nothing like homemade meals that somebody in the family makes better than anybody else.
Yes, I'm a sucker for seafood. I'm also a sucker for pig pickings. And so my family growing up used to go to Topsail and they would fish from the pier. They'd get crabs from the Sound, and we'd come back and get bushels of oysters and put them on the grill. And, imagine eating a fish that was caught an hour ago. Like you can't get that in Raleigh. And so I love my hometown, and we have had and continue to have our struggles in terms of economic development and jobs. When we go to town, we go to Jacksonville or Wilmington. And so anything that I can do to support Maple Hill, give the Pender County Commissioners a heads up that I look forward to talking to them soon about the Maple Hill Community Center, which is where I attended, I think, year one of elementary school or so before it closed. So before there was UNC Law, before there was UNC undergrad, there was Pender High School, there was Burgau Middle, there was Burgau Elementary, and there was Head Start.
What's a good day for Jessica Holmes now? When she puts her head down on the pillow at night and she says, this has been a good day. What's happened?
So one of my favorite speaking engagements is in schools with kids. And so during Black History Month, I was a speaker at Hoggart High School. And I talked to the kids in the auditorium. And at the end, this young boy who reminded me of my nephew, he had his hoodie like sort of half raised. And he said, as he walked to class, he said, "We love you, Miss Holmes." I'd never met him before. We'll probably never meet him again. But the number of students that came up to me and said things like, you know, my family's not from this country and my dream is to become an immigration lawyer. Do you think I can do it? And I look at them and I say, absolutely. And if there's anything I can do to help support you in that, but make no mistake, you can. And so after that speech, I had an opportunity to meet directly with about 25 young girls and have conversations with them about college and the cost of college and how they're going to pay for it and how some of them didn't see a way to pay for it, and many of whom were experiencing personal challenges at home. And I love telling kids that it does not matter how many times you fall on your behind, as long as you get up. So I tell my staff this. I don't proclaim perfection, but I get up every day and I do the best that I can, and I fall on my behind often. But I get back up every time, and I take each of those instances as a learning experience. And so for me, a good day is knowing that I have encouraged someone and had them see themselves in a role that maybe they hadn't seen themselves in before, or a day I'm able to help someone, where I'm able to make a connection with another state agency. One of the projects I'm working on right now is a woman whose home was flooded, and she didn't end up getting the renovations that she thought she was going to get. And literally once I leave here, I'll be calling some folks to see about, getting that help to her. Mm-hmm. And so I love this. I love the public service part of politics. In fact, one of the homeless shelters I lived in was right here in Wilmington.
Wow.
And I went for a short period of time to elementary school here in Wilmington. And one of the people that has changed my life most dramatically in this entire world was the director of that shelter.
Who was?
Her name was Loretta. And she took me on a field trip during Christmas to D.C. And I look back at that like, Mom, you let this stranger take me to D.C.? And she only took me. And I'll never forget, I didn't have a warm jacket. She bought me a warm jacket. And we went to the Capitol building. We went to lots of the sites. And I remember being so enamored by the White House and the Capitol building. And I asked her, how do you get to work in those buildings? I mean, imagine being from Maple Hill and, this is your first time seeing these big buildings. And she was like, oh, those are elected officials. And I'm like, well, what do they do? She said, they help people. And I'm like, okay, well, help me understand, what do they do? She was like, well, what is their profession? How do you become one of those? And she said, well, most of them are attorneys. And I said, I'm going to be an attorney when I grow up.
How old were you at that time?
I was probably in second grade. And growing up, when people would try to trick me to say, like, don't you want to be a doctor? Don't you want to be an astronaut? Don't you want to be a policewoman? And in my naive mindset, I kept to it. I want to be an attorney because attorneys help people. So I didn't know any attorneys. And so I would literally watch TV shows like JAG, Alec McBeal, Boston Legal. And I would try to learn as much as I could about being an attorney. And so one of the most pivotal moments in my entire life happened because of a women's shelter director named Loretta right here in Wilmington.
It's inspiring because your life has come full circle. You've gone from that I want to be to I am, and I want to help to I am helping. You've served on Smart Start boards.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in early childhood education.
You've done that. So even before you got into office, you did volunteer work. To me, too many people complain and don't spend an hour a day at a shelter helping people. They don't volunteer for the homeless shelter. They don't volunteer for the soup kitchen. If more people volunteered, to me, they better their community. And it seems to me like it doesn't take much, but you can help. In one instance, a shelter director helped launch your career.
And in fact, so this white woman took a young black child, and I remember apparently she had told the folks in the neighborhood that I was there, and I just remember people coming to the door with, Barbie dolls, and again, when you're a kid, you don't quite understand, but now that I'm an adult, I appreciate so much. I don't know what made her choose me of all the kids in the shelter, but she did. And so because people open their shelter doors, because of people like Loretta, because of people like Rochelle Whiteside and Karen Quinn, Pender County School employees, because of them, I am. And, my greatest legacy would be for someone to say, Jessica was a part of a pivotal moment in their life that inspired or motivated them to do something that they thought they couldn't do. But I will tell anybody, the journey isn't always pretty. It doesn't mean that it's been linear. It doesn't mean that there were so many nights in college where I just cried. I'll never forget needing to get $20 out of the ATM, but I only had 14. And so I couldn't get the $14 out because it required multiple of 20. So, I did a work study through college. I worked at Express at the mall, and I also worked at a nonprofit. So I was able to maintain a good GPA most of the time working 3 part-time jobs, while being a student at UNC. And so I won't tell anybody that being something different from what you've seen is easy, or that, the red carpet will be rolled out for you. Even now, every single day, in many settings that I'm in, I have to continue to prove myself. So I don't see myself as sort of having made it. Being a woman, being a black woman, being a black woman from a small rural community, I still feel the need to, not just be at the table, but to be prepared and to be knowledgeable and to carry my community on my back when I'm in those spaces.
Well, congratulations on your appointment, State Auditor Jessica Holmes. I appreciate you taking the time today from your busy schedule and your trip here to the coast to sit down for an interview and let the audience of Southeastern North Carolina learn a little bit more about you and about the work that you do as State Auditor. And I think just hearing your story, I know that it's first and foremost in your mind to be the person Loretta was to someone else.
I come from humble beginnings, and one thing about politics, it's a humbling experience in and of itself. Sometimes people love you because of a vote. Some people don't like you because of a vote. But I just try to stick to my faith and focus on families and doing what I believe is the right thing to do. And for that, I can sleep well at night.
State Auditor Holmes, thank you for taking the time.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you.
A big thank you to North Carolina State Auditor Jessica Holmes for taking the time out of her busy schedule to join me for this week's podcast interview. If you'd like to learn more about her and about the duties of the state auditor, just go to auditor.nc.gov. And now, before we go, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please follow or subscribe to the One-on-One with Jon Evans podcast on whatever app you use to listen to your favorite shows. And if you would be so kind, please leave us a rating or a review. We do care what you think about our interviews, and the more feedback we have from friends like you, the higher we'll be listed on the podcast apps, the better chance we'll have of bringing in even more new listeners. I'm Jon Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of One-on-One.